Slide number 3 shows the neocortex, or the human brain, the highest part of the brain, the newest part of the brain. And we need to understand how the brain plays a vital role in consciousness. It's not where consciousness comes from. Consciousness exists regardless of whether the body exists or not. The brain is sort of the antenna for consciousness. It's sort of the receiver-transmitter for consciousness. Through the brain, we express consciousness. And as we'll see, through the brain and the heart, we express consciousness. So it's a vehicle for the expression of consciousness. It is not consciousness itself. So people shouldn't get that confused in this slide, because I'm talking about consciousness as being aware of patterns, the ability to recognize patterns, both within the self and in the realm in which the self operates. That's how I've always used the definition of consciousness. That's been the working definition for consciousness since day one on this podcast. So the brain is bilaterally symmetrical, the neocortex or higher brain, the human brain. It's bilaterally symmetrical. The left brain hemisphere is the intellectual part of the brain, or what we would call the masculine hemisphere. And I put the symbol of the upright pointing triangle, which in the ancient world was known as the blade. Okay? It represents a blade or a phallic symbol representing the masculine in the upright pointed direction. Very simple archetypal symbol. The left hemisphere of the brain largely, and again, the neuroscience is a lot more complicated than this very oversimplified model that I'm presenting. This is called a model that is true enough. Neuroscience is a little bit more complicated than what I'm talking about here. But in general terms, the left side of the brain makes possible logical thought, analytical thought, scientific thought, and mathematical thought. Okay? Linear thought, linear progression, physical tasks and activities, logic. We're not talking about super big picture theory, big picture thinking and uniting patterns. We're talking about laser-like focus, concentration, logical thought, language, math, science. That's what the left side of the brain generally governs and makes possible in a human being. And that is what we would call the intellect. That is the intellect. Now notice that I didn't say that that's intelligence, because I'm going to make the distinction between intellect and intelligence in a moment. Let's look at the right side of the brain, the neocortex. And again, this is review for those who have listened to this show. But again, I want to put on record and go into depth and make an extended version of this podcast, because I have the forum to do this, this presentation, because I have the forum to do this in the form of this podcast. So again, I'm going to take my time and I'm going to go through this material, and it'll take as long as it takes. So the right side of the brain, the right brain hemisphere, is the intuitive or feminine part of the brain. And I have it depicted here in blue with a symbol known as, in the ancient world, the chalice. This is an ancient archetypal symbol of the feminine womb. It was called the chalice. All right? So, people have called it the Grail, because it's largely what is lost and not being actively used properly. It's been usurped, it's been taken over, it's been directed in wrong ways. We really get in touch with the true aspect of the sacred feminine, then we're going to understand what needs to be done. We're going to understand that action is required, and then we're going to work together with the left brain hemisphere to actually take that action and do what is required to reverse the trend that we're seeing take place all around us. So the right hemisphere largely governs creative thought, creativity, artistic tendencies. Okay? Holistic thought, being able to see big picture, the big picture, patterns. Really coming into awareness of patterns that are taking place, especially historical patterns as well. It's about compassion, nurturing, respect for other people, understanding what rights are, extending rights and freedom to other people, not intruding on them, because you have compassion and you want people's rights to be respected. So all forms of compassion, nurturing, moral understanding is largely governed by the right brain. And really, to be honest, that's governed by the prefrontal neocortex on both sides, right behind the forehead. It's often why people depicted the third eye being the spiritual center of the being right on the forehead. And again, people say, well, it's the pineal gland. It is the neocortex, the prefrontal cortex, at the level of the pineal gland. Because the eye within the pineal gland activates when we balance these two brain hemispheres, comes online and truly activates the prefrontal cortex, which is where, that's the moral center of the brain. That's where morality is processed. So the ancients were depicting things that they knew about the brain symbolically. When the chalice and blade come together, they form the blazing star, the seal of Solomon, the sun and the moon, because the left side of the brain is the sun, the masculine. The right side of the brain is the moon, the feminine. You put them together, it becomes the Temple of Solomon, sun and moon together, Sol, Mon, sun, moon. That's the awakening of the third eye, because now the brain is communicating across the corpus callosum, between the brain hemispheres, and then the prefrontal cortex is truly electrified and awoken. And that's where morality is born. That's where the true, objective knowledge of right and wrong is integrated and processed into the being.